Welcome to Venice Views. We're here in the beautiful Venice Theater. It's been here for a long time. A lot of people in Venice helped to get this theater where it is and how it is. And some of those people are with me today. Their family has been greatly involved in the development of the theater as well as other aspects of Venice. With me today are Jeff and Bruce Dillon. Welcome to Venice Views. And tell me a little bit about, first of all, I want to kind of introduce you to the audience that you are two siblings of a family of 5, right? Mm-hmm. And the oldest is Jan, then Wendy, then Bruce, then Keith and Jeff.
That's right. That's right.
And your parents were Sam and Joan Dillon.
Right. And correct, right?
Tell me how your folks met.
They were both stationed in the South Pacific. On New Zealand, I believe, or New Guinea, I believe it was. And
is this during World War II?
Yes, World War II.
World War II.
My mom was an Australian native, and in the Australian Air Force as a radio operator. And my father was in the Army Air Corps and worked on radios. They didn't meet over a radio, but somewhere in town on leave or something.
So Joan came back with Sam as his bride?
Well, she was a little late because she was pregnant with my sister Jan, who was born in Australia, and she came after Jan was born.
Okay, and so then how did they end up in Venice?
Well, my father's family was from Pennsylvania, Mercer, Pennsylvania, about 60 or 70 miles from Pittsburgh, I believe. I've only been there a couple of times since I left at the age of 4, which was a long time ago. My mom was never very fond of cold weather.
That's true.
Cold weather.
Yes,
to my
I think
mom
that's even documented somewhere, right?
Cold weather to my mom was like below 70.
Yeah. She'd break out the green Argyle socks when it would get cold. Yeah, for years.
So how did they end up in Venice?
Well, because she didn't think too much of the weather, having come from Australia, although Sydney is not exactly tropical. It's more like the weather of North Carolina. I suspect she made it clear that it'd be great if she could move. And one of my dad's co-workers got a job in Punta Gorda at a newspaper. He worked for a newspaper up north. And the parting words were, if you find somebody else looking for some help, let me know. And not long after that, he received word, and we came to Florida so he could edit the Englewood Herald in 1956.
And did your family then move to a house in Venice?
Well, first we lived on the Englewood Road in one of 3 little flat-top houses that were kind of halfway between Venice and Englewood. And then we moved to Groveland Avenue. My mom was a little nomadic. Groveland Avenue now comes off of the bypass. The bypass wasn't there at the time. When my sisters and I would go to school, we would walk across where the canal is now to elementary school.
So what year was that?
I started elementary school myself in 1958, I think.
So the Intracoastal Waterway wasn't dug there until 65, I think. 67.
63 or 65, I think, maybe.
Okay. So there was nothing to cross, so you all just walked from Groveland across the street that later became the bypass and on through the fields?
Through the woods and and a junkyard that was there at the time, and over to the elementary school.
Okay. Okay, so now your dad then later became the editor of the Venice Gondolier, correct?
Yeah, he actually started in Venice. He worked for the Sarasota News. He was the Venice Bureau of the Sarasota News. His office was in the Gulf Breeze Hotel, and I, for the life of me, can't remember the original name of that hotel, but it was where the post office is located now.
I see.
And he had an office there, and the technology wasn't what it is today. You'd have to get in line to make a call to Sarasota. more or less. You'd queue up with the operator, and she'd let you know when it was your turn.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah.
So he was filing his stories over the phone and having to queue up with the operator to wait for his turn.
Right.
So how did your folks get involved in the theater?
Well, my mom, I think, always had the theater bug. My dad tolerated my mom in the theater, I think.
Mother did some extra work in Australia for Cinesound Studios, which is a famous studio of the United Kingdom, and always had that little bug and did some things, had lots of elocution training, and then it was around 1960. Mom was in town for a few years doing some other things, and then started volunteering backstage and at the box office and doing different things, helping in the costumes, working with different departments, and started acting on stage as well.
And where was the theater then?
The theater was out by the airport in what was essentially mostly a renovated Quonset hut. It was taken and didn't have any air conditioning back in those days, and a tin roof. And that had some holes in it, and so they'd have to stop for the thunderstorms because of the thunder you couldn't hear, and the rain would actually drip down. There's a famous picture of the water running down the center aisle of the theater with programs floating on it. And then the power would go off, and it was these old rheostat light boards that you'd start up, and they'd go one, nun, get up, and then the power would go off, and then everybody would stop very patiently and talk among themselves. And then the power would come back on, and they continue with the play. So it was very humble beginnings. The backstage was, the stage ended, and then there was a couple sets of costume lockers, and somebody painted the words "green room" on them. And it was a little tiny hallway about 6.5 feet wide with a couple old theater seats there, and that was the green room.
Green room
and
being
the costumes,
being a place where people prepare to
now
go
they'd
on
have
stage.
a separate room, and they'd have coffee there and all kinds of other amenities. But back in those days, you just kind of talked as quietly as you could, and you sat there. And then the costume shop and the dressing rooms were kind of along this back, and they were old, renovated, just studded out rooms, made by a carpenter, and these little areas. So it was very humble beginnings back in those days, but fun. Very good core group of people that acted in the plays, built all the sets.
Do you remember some of those people from those days?
Oh, certainly. Yeah.
Who were some of those folks that were really instrumental in the
the people that started the theater in 50, a small group of 6 or 7 people, Muriel Royal, Fifi Green, those the founding members, and that grew quickly, but the people that I kind of grew up with were Bess Walmsley, Bren Walmsley, Dick Morton, Mac McFarland, Yvonne Pinkerton, Jerry Becker, the people that were long-standing volunteers, and in those days very active board members, and everybody kind of helped out doing almost everything. Writing a publicity release, helping build the set, make a costume. There was a guy, a longtime volunteer, Chris McGee, who practically built all the sets for the theater single-handedly, and he had a whole life and career before we knew him as a retired person, and he was still there 20 or 30 years helping us out. So it was really something.
So your mom, Joan, she loved it so much. She must have just taken y'all kids. Y'all kids is a Texas phrase. She must have taken y'all to her theater, to whenever she was going there to volunteer work or be in a play. Did y'all just kind of traipse along after her?
We all spent time on the boards. Bruce did some shows. Wendy did several shows as a young girl, and then went on to become a professional actress in the theater and television and voiceover. Jan spent some time on the boards. Keith was quite active. I was small enough, I think, to be in tow. I was in 1966 or 67, 5 or 6 years old, and my own personal experience was they always needed some kid to be in the show, and I was that kid.
Right.
Keith was, the first thing that I did was in the chorus of a production of Toad Hall, and Keith was the lead. He was Mr. Toad. No makeup, wearing these big ceramic masks that I'm sure were very hot and uncomfortable back in those days. And I was part of the little litany of various forest animals in the background. And then I just was, every time they needed a kid or a paper boy, they'd say, "Jeff, can you be in the show?" And
remind us about how that transition took place. You moved from the airport, the theater moved from the airport over here, where we are now.
That's a great story. They had actually, were shooting for a place, some property over by the library and where the community center is now in Blaylock Park, and there was a sign there for many years that said the future home of the Venice Little Theater. And that fell through for one reason or another. Then they found the old KMI, which is the space that we're sitting in right now, which was the gun range and basketball court. And the KMI had since left and gone on and done other things.
And for our listeners or viewers, that's Kentucky Military Institute.
Kentucky Military Institute, which was the winter quarters. So they would come down here when Kentucky was too cold. They would come down here and march in the parking lot outside Venice Little Theater, which was parade ground in those days, and several things. And I actually rehearsed a show before any of the renovations started, when it was still the basketball court, and with a guy named Phil Brandon, who was a longtime Venice Little Theater director, very fiery personality. And it was a show called The Miracle Worker, which is about Helen Keller, and I played Jimmy, the brother that had passed, that kind of is seen in flashback. And it was, we were there with a single ghost light in the middle of this big, dark basketball court, and that was the little space that we had to rehearse for the shows.
That's great.
That was, the transition finally occurred in October 73. The 73-74 season. We were going to open with Little Abner, and it had 64 people in the cast, and I think that probably is a Venice Theater record. They've probably had large shows since then. Probably very few times if they had 64 people. We rehearsed that show for about 4 months in the parking lot of the old theater, in various spaces, doing production numbers outside in the parking lot at night. But that was the only place they had room. And the theater was really supposed to open in October of 73, but because it wasn't ready yet. And so they had to push back the opening to mid-November. And then we opened Little Abner in mid-November to accolades, and it was a great production, and everybody came together and built the set based on the original designs of Al Cap in the comic strips. So they actually translated all that stuff right on stage. It was amazing that they really did a great job. And that was our opening production, our maiden voyage in this new space.
And so since that time, this has been expanded and is growing. And actually, the Venice Theater is going to have an international festival at Second in 2014. So it's a really kind of an exciting time for the theater. Well, tell me about, now your mom was in some plays and she was volunteering, but she actually became a paid employee of the theater at one time.
That's true. She was a volunteer for about 20 years, again, and working on all these departments, publicity and costumes and acting on stage, of course, a little directing, a little producing. She would produce these fashion shows, which we would all help out with, these period fashion shows, and she'd insert music, and Bruce and I would work on the slides and the lights and the tech together, and we, she had kids and mechanical sons, and so we'd go off and help her do these things. And then around 77, 78, the board decided that they needed professional help in the costume department, and they hired somebody part-time. Mom wasn't the first employee, it was somebody else. And she did it for about a season, and then Mom got the job as a part-time costumer and wardrobe mistress, which then eventually grew into a full-time position, taking care of main stage and stage 2. She did that for years by herself, loved the period shows. She would stay every night and dress the girls and make sure their bows were all perfect and their seams were all good and the guys were all on nice straight lines and they looked good and sharp, and she really, she had a really good attention to detail with the period pieces. And she did that pretty much by herself for the first 15 years or so, and then they started hiring people to give her a hand and take over stage 2, and she would do main stage and so on. So it's not the staff that it is now. But Mom, with a group of very gifted volunteers that would take costume pieces home at night and while watching TV, do French seams on dresses. And, Mom often had a very good reputation in this area, and people often compared her costumes to that of the Oslo because of the care and the detail and the finish work, and you were built from head to toe, of everything from the top of your head all the way down to the right kinds of shoes.
Well, anyone who knew Joan knew that she had great passion for what she did.
That's right, that's right. I was in a production of Brighton Beach Memoirs on this stage, and Mom found a pair of real period knickers, wool, knickers. Now, the show started rehearsing in August and September for opening in
Wonderful.
October. And I wore a wool sweater, over a shirt with these real wool knickers and wool socks and period high tops. And it took me a long time not to just perspire a lot to get used to wearing that costume. But everything was, she found somebody donated something, and so I was wearing real period clothes for that show. It was really, really cool.
That's amazing, yeah. In this little town, those stories are so amazing to me. Now, okay, I want to go back to the time when you were living on Groveland, you're walking to school. So did you live there for a long time? Did you move after that, or did you?
We moved over to Harbor Drive, to one of the 1927 houses there.
Oh, yes.
By where Menendez meets Harbor Drive.
Okay.
Still had a cistern on it.
So the cistern collected rainwater for you to use in the house?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it piped in then from the cistern?
No,
or
it wasn't piped in from the cistern, but my sisters used to wash their hair with it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Because rainwater is softer and
Right.
makes your hair shinier. Yeah.
And
Was that the two-story house?
yes,
Oh, okay.
next to Mrs. Blaylock.
Right.
Oh, you live next door to the Blaylocks?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It was a pretty cool place to grow up. No air conditioning, of course.
Well, those homes their walls are so thick, and the way the windows and doors are arranged, you can open it up and get a nice breeze, and it stays pretty cool. Not that much?
Totally convinced of that.
Okay, you lived in it, I didn't, so I'm going with your story. What did you do for fun? Did you go to the beach? Did you, the beach?
I went to the beach. We actually, way back when, the trough along the edge of the beach was full of rocks and fossils and things like that, and the city actually paid us, I think, a half a cent a piece to pull the rocks out of there, because you had to walk through that to get to the sandbar to be comfortable.
So did you find a lot of prehistoric things in there? Or?
We were more interested in collecting the half a penny a piece.
I see. So, and then what else? Tell me some other things like that.
Well, in those days, the places to hang out for kids or teenagers would have been the beach, when you could park there.
Right.
And then the tennis courts. That was the other big place, the other big hangout. Meet me at the tennis courts. So the cars would be parked up along the outside of the fence line. And
so did you actually play tennis, or you just hung out there?
I did play tennis there. Mother looked at me when I was about 12 years old and said, "Jeff, it's time to learn a sport," and not big enough for football and so on. So she was Australian. Tennis was a very kind of natural evolution. So I picked up the tennis racket, and I played for several years on those courts. Yeah, it was great. Go there in the morning and play with our more mature members of Venice back in those days, and then come back in the afternoon and play at night. It was a great environment. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And were there, all of your family went to Venice High School, I presume?
Right.
Yes. And so now, Jan's the oldest. Now, what I remember the most about Jan is her wonderful pies that she used to make at the pies and cakes, I guess, at the drugstore.
Oh, right.
The drugstore. Right. She worked there. Yeah. And that was where T.J. Carney's is now. But everybody in town went to that kind of half-circle counter to talk over business every day. It was, It was where your dad probably got some of his news in the old days.
Probably so.
And Jan still cooks for special events and family engagements and things. She's still our resident dessert chef, primarily. Comes up with homemade things.
And so Wendy went to New York to be an actress.
Actually, to Miami first.
To Miami?
Grew up here, went to Florida State University, would come back and work in the summers. 2 jobs, Smitty's and a restaurant called King's Table, which was over by the Dairy Queen.
Okay. The Dairy Queen, which is gone also.
Which is all gone, right?
That would have been
Bob
Wedgwood
used to own
at one
and run
time, right?
for years and years and years.
No, it was on the other side of where the liquor store used to be.
Oh, okay. All right. So here at the theater, if you were here today, behind the theater is a storage building that used to be ABC Liquor.
Right.
Then there's a parking lot that used to be the old Dairy Queen, all along US 41 business. And then someplace in there was this other King's...
The King's Table.
King's Table, right.
I think the King's Table may have been torn down to build the ABC.
Right.
Okay, I see.
And Wendy would work both places, and she would work the breakfasts at the King's Table and the evenings at Smitty's.
And Smitty's is now Pineapples.
Oh, okay. See, there we go. I wouldn't even have known that, but yeah. And then she got herself through college, and then went to Miami to become an actress in a theater company, and eventually became the leading lady and co-artistic director. She and her boyfriend at the time then moved from Miami to New York City around 73, 74 or something like that. They stopped for a quick visit and then moved up there. And Wendy had aspirations to be a Broadway actress on the stage, but got hooked into television and film, and took a commercial acting course from a guy named Bob Collier, who was the Grecian formula guy. Squeeze the stuff in your hand and rub it on your hair, and your hair turns jet black, that guy.
Would I have seen Wendy on TV anytime recently?
You know, probably not her face. You would have maybe seen the back of her or heard her voice. She's a premier voiceover actress and vocal coach. A very great reputation in New York City. She was the Northern Quilted commercial. They did those little cartoons, those little stick figures, the housewife and the English gal and somebody else, and Wendy was the voice of the English gal.
Okay.
And it tested the highest of any of the commercials they'd done so far. They brought her back for 2 or 3 other times.
Oh,
so that's my sister's voice. And now she's lives in and around the New York area, and still auditions and does things, and is a vocal coach and commercial coach and actress. Yeah.
So now Bruce is the next one. You live in Nokomis, and Bruce, tell us a little bit about some of your activities there. You've been really involved in a lot of civic things, including the Legacy Trail.
Yeah, it all started with, I read a newspaper article, and the county planning department was putting together neighborhood plans for the different communities, Osprey, Englewood, Nokomis, and South Venice, stuff like that. And they were asking for input, and I've been kind of active at the telephone company and let's just say I was active at the telephone company. And so I went ahead and attended these meetings, and over the years, it took about 2 years to put the plan together, and then along with the plan, they had an advisory committee to advise the county commission on the implementation of the plan. And the day that the county commission adopted it, the head planner, Sarah Blanchard, that spearheaded the effort, walked over and said, "You'll probably need this," and handed me a big thick book that was the plan and every backup document regarding it that you could find. And I ended up serving as the chair of the advisory committee for about a decade. Major things that we helped the county figure out were the central water for Nokomis, the medians, or not the trees in the medians out there.
On US 41?
On US 41, the streetscape on Colonial Lane. There were 30 projects in the plan, including the Legacy Trail. There's about maybe a mile or a mile and a half of the Legacy Trail that are within the boundaries of the Nokomis Revitalization Plan. And if you think back, remember that the bridges that replaced the large trestles were not built, so we had our own little section of trail there, but we weren't connected to anything. And then finally they found the money to put the bridges in, and everybody loved it. Actually, the Friends of the Legacy Trail and the Friends of Sarasota County Parks suggested that the County Commission put together a feasibility study on extending that trail. So the County Commission just approved the funding for that feasibility study a couple of days ago.
Oh, fantastic. So now the trail is how long?
The Legacy Trail itself is 10.6 miles long. It connects to the Venetian Waterway Park at the train depot, and is about 4 miles long on either side of the intercoastal. It goes to Casperson's Beach on the west side, and it goes to Shamrock Park on the east side. And the trail currently, the northern terminus is Palmer Ranch Parkway and Culver House Park as well.
And so now where will it go to?
What the initiative is to get it up to Payne Park in Sarasota, which is up by the courthouse.
That's just phenomenal. It's a trail for walkers and bicyclists, and you can go out there in any non-motorized vehicle or on your feet or skates and not ever have to deal with a car for that many miles.
Right.
So it's a wonderfully healthy and recreational thing to do.
It's a great draw for our area.
It is. And Venice, in fact, just recently received a silver bicycle friendly designation, so that definitely helped to bring that about.
Yeah, we have some counters out there. We average about 120,000 visitors a year.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Wow.
And then FDOT also put the bridge across the US 41 bypass that connects all of that.
But we refer to that as the gateway to Nokomis.
Indeed.
They're working on the arch right
yes,
now.
I see.
Yeah.
Very good. So, okay, so then your brother Keith lives in Australia.
He does. He discovered administratively, because my mother was an Australian citizen, any child born of an Australian national after 1947 was eligible for citizenship for a couple bucks and a background check for them and us. And so he, after traveling around, Keith has a great sense of wanderlust. He's traveled to Africa, he's traveled to Hawaii, he's been all over the world. He's traveled for several years, across the United States several times on motorcycle and car. He's really traveled around. And he came back in and discovered this thing and moved to Australia. In the meantime, meeting a woman and having another son. His first son is a guy named Justice, who lives up in Georgia, who's a man in his 30s. And then Keith had a second son named Sam, named after my father. And he took Sam to Australia, and now I speak with him on Skype, and Sam's a little Australian kid now.
Oh.
He's just he's environmentalized himself there. Keith doesn't speak with an Australian accent, but he really enjoys it down there. And Sam is now into the hand combat arts, karate and several other things, and he's getting the opportunity actually to travel to the Orient with his little group.
Fantastic.
So Keith is really taking advantage of living in that hemisphere and allowing Sam to have many opportunities down there.
That's
so
fabulous.
It's great.
I wish your dad could have known his little Sam grandson.
Absolutely.
Now tell us about Jeff. What have you been up to?
I had a long career in the theater. I started on, much like my sister, started on the boards at the Venice Little Theater. I was here for 30 years as an actor and designer and director, working also at the Players Theater, the Oslo, the Sarasota Opera House, the Van Wezel. Became a union stagehand. I still am. And then 3 or 4 years ago, I wanted to change it up a little bit, and I started working for the YMCA. So I manage one of the branches for the Sarasota Family YMCA, but I still do 4 or 5 professional theater jobs a year, keeping my hand in and
you were telling me about a big one, annual event.
That's right. We have the annual event, the Ringling International Arts Festival, which takes place on the Ringling campus and the FSU Performing Arts Center, and I run one of the stages up there and make sure that we load in the show and get the thing up and running, and everybody's got what they need, and it's great. We're in its 5th year, and I've been with it since its inception, and it's a great event. It brings a lot of tourism. Actually, Western Europeans come over to Sarasota, quite a few, and it's in October. It's coming right up. It's around October 10th, around the second week of October every year.
Very good.
And so it's been a great journey, and I'm happy to be doing all the things I'm doing.
So your mom had such passion for theater, and she obviously left her mark on all of you kids. But what about your dad? Does anybody have a passion for writing and for storytelling? Your dad was probably one of the best storytellers I ever knew.
Well, it's interesting. Mother had many careers. One of her careers, another long-standing career, was she worked for the library system for many years and was an avid reader herself, as well as children's librarian, being acting head librarian on several occasions. So we had words on both sides. In book form from Mom and periodical form from Dad, and so words, and we grew up with the knowing that there really is a word for everything. And we wanted to make sure that we knew that word, how to spell that word. And we all dabble in writing a little bit and communications. I do some public speaking on occasion and have to write things down, and they're great skills to have. And you know, the old newspaper thing, who, what, when, where, what, why, and how. You know, banging it out there, getting it out there, knocking it out, punching it up, keeping it moving.
That's right.
And then with my theater background, with the, you know, keeping it going with the pace, and so I think we've all dabbled in public speaking and doing a little bit of writing here and there. We all feel pretty comfortable behind the lectern. And
were you going to add anything to that, Bruce?
Well, one of the things we used to call my dad was the original spell check.
Right? He was spell check before spell check.
He did spell check for me at the Gondolier, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, you know, it's been so much fun having you all here in this theater and knowing a little bit more about your family's involvement in it and your life here in Venice. And I appreciate it very much. And I appreciate you all being with us today, too. And I hope you'll join us again when we bring you more Venice Views.